The morning that changed everything. The October rain hammered against the towering glass windows of Manhattan. Heart Institute, as Gabriella Thompson clutched her worn leather bag against her chest. Her reflection in the polished marble floor showed a young woman trying desperately to look confident, though her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the collar of her crisp white uniform. This was it. Her first day as a medical assistant at one of the most prestigious cardiac centers in the entire United States. Everything she had worked for, every sacrifice her family had made back in rural Tennessee, had led to this single moment. "You must be the new assistant," a warm voice interrupted her nervous thoughts. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair approached, extending her hand. "I'm Maggie Foster, head nurse on the cardiac floor. You look like you could use a friendly face." Bree shook her hand gratefully, feeling some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "Gabriella Thompson, but everyone calls me Bree. Is it that obvious I'm terrified?" Maggie laughed, a sound like wind chimes on a summer porch. "Honey, I've seen residents with years of medical school under their belts shake like leaves on their first day here. The Institute has that effect on people. But you've got good instincts, I can tell. Just remember, we're all here because we care about saving lives, not because we're trying to impress each other." The man behind the reputation as Maggie guided Bree through the labyrinth of corridors. She explained the hospital's structure, pointing out different departments and introducing her to various staff members who rushed past with purposeful strides. The Manhattan Heart Institute wasn't just a hospital. It was a monument to cardiovascular excellence. Founded and funded primarily by one man whose name was spoken with a mixture of reverence and caution. "Dr. Jonathan Hayes will be your direct supervisor," Maggie explained as they rode the elevator to the 6th floor. "He's brilliant, probably the best diagnostic cardiologist on the East Coast. He's also demanding, particular, and has very little patience for mistakes." Bree felt her stomach tighten. She had read about Dr. Hayes during her application process. Graduated top of his class from Johns Hopkins, completed his residency at Massachusetts General, published groundbreaking research on heart valve replacement techniques before he turned 30. At 38, he had already built an empire of cardiac care facilities across the country. He was also known for his cold demeanor and impossibly high standards. "Don't let his reputation scare you too much," Maggie added, sensing Bree's apprehension. "Underneath all that ice, there's a man who genuinely cares about his patients. He just doesn't show it the way most people do." The elevator doors opened onto a floor that somehow managed to feel both cutting-edge modern and warmly inviting. Patients in rooms visible through large windows were monitored by the latest technology, while artwork featuring peaceful landscapes decorated the walls. This was the Cardiac Intensive Care Unit, where the most critical cases received around-the-clock attention. First impressions and cold receptions, Dr. Hayes. "This is Gabriella Thompson, your new medical assistant," Maggie announced as they entered a spacious office where a tall man stood. Reviewing charts on multiple computer monitors, he turned slowly, and Bree found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from granite. Dr. Jonathan Hayes stood well over 6 feet, with dark hair showing distinguished traces of gray at the temples, sharp blue eyes that seemed to analyze everything in a single glance, and a jawline that could have belonged to a movie star. He wore his white coat-like armor, every inch the picture of medical authority. "You're 7 minutes late," were his first words, delivered in a voice that carried no warmth whatsoever. In this unit, 7 minutes can mean the difference between life and death for a patient in cardiac arrest. Bree felt her cheeks flush. "Sir, I was told to report at 8 o'clock, and it's currently 7:53 according to my watch." Dr. Hayes raised one eyebrow, a gesture that somehow conveyed both surprise and disapproval simultaneously. "Your watch is incorrect. All timepieces in this facility are synchronized to atomic precision. If you're going to work in my unit, Miss Thompson, you'll need to ensure your equipment is accurate." First lesson learned. Maggie shot Bree an apologetic look before excusing herself. Leaving the young woman alone with her formidable new supervisor, Dr. Hayes returned his attention to his monitors, apparently dismissing her presence entirely. "Dr. Hayes, where would you like me to begin?" Bree asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Patient charts, he replied without looking at her. All admissions from the past 24 hours need to be reviewed for medication interactions and potential complications. The database is on that terminal. I expect a summary of any concerns within 2 hours. Bree moved to the indicated computer and began working, acutely aware of his presence in the room. The task was complex, requiring her to cross-reference multiple medications, patient histories, and potential risk factors. She had trained for this, studied late into countless nights. But the pressure of performing under Dr. Hayes's silent observation made every keystroke feel weighted with consequence. When theory meets reality an hour into her review, an alarm began shrieking from somewhere down the hallway. The sound cut through the quiet office like a blade. Dr. Hayes was moving before Bree could even process what was happening. "Code Blue, room 607, a voice announced over the intercom system. "Code Blue, room 607. Bree's training kicked in automatically. She abandoned her computer and followed Dr. Hayes as he strode rapidly toward the emergency. Room 607 housed an elderly man who had been admitted the previous evening with unstable angina. Now, according to the monitor display visible through the doorway, his heart had stopped beating entirely. The room filled rapidly with medical personnel. Dr. Hayes took command with the calm precision of someone who had faced death countless times and refused to yield. "Start compressions. Get the crash cart. I need his latest labs pulled up now." Bree found herself swept into the choreographed chaos, following orders barked by various team members. A nurse directed her to prepare medication doses, while another positioned the defibrillator. She had practiced scenarios like this dozens of times in her training, but nothing compared to the raw urgency of watching a real human life hanging in the balance. "Charge to 200, Dr. Hayes commanded. His hands positioned over the patient's chest. "Everyone clear." The body jerked as electricity coursed through it. The monitor continued its flat, unwavering line. No response. Again. 300. Clear. Another shock. Still nothing. Dr. Hayes immediately resumed chest compressions, his movements mechanical in their consistency. 30 compressions to rescue breaths. The rhythm of attempted resurrection. "Bree," his voice cut through her focus. It was the first time he had used her name. "Check his medication list. What was administered in the past 6 hours?" She pulled up the digital chart on a nearby tablet, scanning quickly. Metoprolol at 2 a.m., aspirin at 5 a.m., and atorvastatin at 6 a.m. Dosage on the metoprolol, 50 milligrams. Dr. Hayes' jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He's hypersensitive. Pull 1 milligram of atropine. We need to counteract the beta blocker effect before his heart will respond." Bree prepared the injection with shaking hands, but her training held firm. Clean technique, proper measurement, double-checked dosage. She handed the syringe to Dr. Hayes, who administered it directly into the IV line. "Charge again. 360 clear." This time, when the shock delivered its electric command, the monitor emitted a blessed beep. Then another. A rhythm appeared, weak and irregular, but unmistakably alive. The look that changed everything. The room erupted in controlled celebration as the patient's vital signs stabilized. Team members began the process of post-resuscitation care, while Dr. Hayes stepped back, pulling off his gloves with deliberate calm. But Bree noticed his hands just for a moment, had the slightest tremor before he steadied them. As the immediate crisis passed and additional staff took over monitoring, Dr. Hayes turned to leave the room. His eyes swept across the team, acknowledging their work with small nods, till his gaze landed on Bree. For just a heartbeat, something flickered across his features. Recognition. Confusion. Whatever it was, disappeared so quickly she might have imagined it. "Miss Thompson, my office." Now. Her heart sank. Had she done something wrong? Made some error in the chaos that she had not noticed? She followed him back down the hallway, her mind racing through every action she had taken during the emergency. Once in his office, with the door closed, Dr. Hayes stood with his back to her, staring out the window at the rain-soaked Manhattan skyline. The silence stretched uncomfortably. That medication catch potentially saved that man's life, he finally said, still not turning around. Quick thinking, good recall of the chart information. Well done, Bree blinked in surprise. A compliment was the last thing she had expected. Thank you, sir.
I'll name at your training,
He continued, finally turning to face her. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and protected. Where did you complete your certification? Community college in Nashville. Then I did my clinical rotations at Vanderbilt Medical Center, Bree explained, straightening her shoulders. I know it's not Johns Hopkins or an Ivy League school, but my instructors said I had strong instincts for patient care. Your accent? Dr. Hayes said abruptly. East Tennessee. Small town called Pineville, about 2 hours from Knoxville. Population barely breaks 2,000. Something shifted in his expression, so subtle that Bree almost missed it. His jaw tightened. His eyes seemed to refocus on something far beyond her physical presence, as if looking into a memory he had buried deep. Did you grow up there? He asked quietly. Yes, sir. My whole life, until I moved to Nashville for school. My daddy runs the only general store in town, and my mama teaches elementary school. It's not fancy, but it's home. Dr. Hayes turned back to the window, his reflection ghostly in the rain-streaked glass. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press against the very air in the room. 12 years ago, I was driving through East Tennessee on my way to a medical conference in Knoxville. My younger brother Daniel was with me. We had a car accident on a rural mountain road during a thunderstorm. Bree's breath caught. She suddenly knew, with absolute certainty, where this story was going. A young girl, couldn't have been more than 12 or 13 years old, found us. The car had gone off the road, rolled twice. Daniel was unconscious, bleeding badly from a head wound. I had broken ribs and couldn't move without excruciating pain. This girl, this child, she ran 2 miles in the pouring rain to get help because there was no cell service. She came back with her father and half the volunteer fire department. They kept Daniel stable until the ambulance arrived. He turned to face her fully now, and in his eyes, Bree saw the unmistakable light of recognition mixed with something that looked like wonder. That girl had blonde hair plastered to her face by the rain, but even through the storm and the panic, she kept telling my brother that everything would be okay. She held pressure on his wound with her own hands, ruining her church dress. She talked to him the entire time, keeping him conscious, telling him about her town and her school and her dreams of becoming a nurse someday. Her voice was the thing that kept him anchored to life until help arrived. Bree felt tears stinging her eyes as the memory flooded back. She had been 14, not 12, coming home from Wednesday evening church service with her father when they had spotted the wrecked car down an embankment. She remembered the terror, the desperate need to help, the way one of the men had looked at her with such gratitude even through his pain.
You're him?
She whispered. You're the doctor from that night. Dr. Jonathan Hayes, billionaire physician and renowned cardiologist, stood before her with an expression that had finally cracked its icy shell. What showed beneath was raw, human, and utterly unexpected. I never forgot that girl, he said softly. I never forgot her voice or her courage. I tried to find her afterward, to thank her properly. But by the time I recovered enough to make the trip back to that area, your family had moved. The general store had changed ownership. We moved to Nashville a few months later when Mama got a better teaching position, Bree explained, her mind reeling. I never knew what happened to you or your brother. I always wondered if you both survived. Daniel made a full recovery, Jonathan said, and for the first time since they had met, he smiled. It transformed his entire face, revealing the man hidden beneath the professional armor. He's a pediatric surgeon now in Boston, married with twin daughters. He talks about that night sometimes, about the angel girl who saved his life. The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows as two people stood in an office high above Manhattan. Connected by a thread of fate that had been spun 12 years earlier on a dark mountain road, neither quite knew what to say next, the weight of coincidence and destiny rendering them both momentarily speechless. Finally, Jonathan cleared his throat, some of the professional distance returning to his posture, but not quite reaching his eyes. I believe I owe you an apology, Miss Thompson. My coldness this morning was unconscionable. I've grown accustomed to maintaining distance from my staff, but you deserve better than that, especially given what you've already done for my family. Bree shook her head quickly. You didn't know who I was, and I understand about professional boundaries. I'm here to learn and to help patients, not to be treated special because of something I did as a kid. Nevertheless, Jonathan continued, I want you to know that your instincts that night, your courage and compassion, they're exactly the qualities that make an exceptional medical professional. If you apply those same qualities here, you'll go far in this field. A knock on the door interrupted the moment. Maggie poked her head in, her expression curious as she took in the scene before her. Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Hayes, but the family of the patient from 607 is here. They're asking to speak with the medical team who performed the resuscitation. Jonathan nodded, his professional mask sliding fully back into place. We'll be right there. As Maggie withdrew, he turned back to Bree. Ready for your first family consultation? Bree straightened her uniform, pushing aside the swirl of emotions and memories to focus on the task at hand. Yes, sir. As they walked together, toward the conference room where anxious family members waited for news of their loved one, Bree felt the weight of the morning's revelations settling into something new. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was a continuation of a story that had begun on a stormy night in Tennessee. Written in mud and rain, and the desperate, human need to help others survive, she didn't know yet how this new chapter would unfold. But she knew with absolute certainty that nothing about her time at Manhattan Heart Institute would be ordinary. The doctor who had seemed so cold and distant just hours ago was connected to one of the most significant moments of her young life. And somehow, against all odds and logic, fate had brought them back together. The real work, she sensed, was only just beginning. The weight of shared memories the weeks following that rainy October. Morning shifted something fundamental in the atmosphere of Manhattan Heart Institute, at least on the 6th floor, where Bree worked alongside Dr. Jonathan Hayes. To the casual observer, their interactions remained professionally cordial. Nothing more than the standard relationship between a demanding attending physician and his diligent assistant. But beneath the surface of medical terminology and patient care protocols, an unspoken understanding had taken root. Bree found herself assigned to increasingly complex cases, her responsibilities expanding far beyond what a new medical assistant would typically handle. She assisted in diagnostic procedures, participated in patient consultations, and even contributed observations during the morning rounds that Dr. Hayes conducted with his team of residents and specialists. Some of the more senior staff noticed the shift, whispering questions about favoritism in the break room when they thought she couldn't hear. Don't let them get to you, Maggie, advised one afternoon as they restocked supplies in the medication room. The older nurse had become something of a guardian angel to Bree, offering wisdom accumulated from 30 years of hospital politics and human nature. Jonathan Hayes doesn't do anything without reason. If he's giving you opportunities, it's because he sees potential that needs developing, not because he's playing favorites. Bree appreciated the support, but she couldn't help the nagging doubt that crept in during quiet moments. Was she truly earning her expanded role through merit? Or was Jonathan's gratitude for that long-ago night clouding his professional judgment? The question bothered her more than she cared to admit. The past refuses to stay buried 3 weeks into her tenure. As November winds began stripping the last leaves from Central Park's trees, Bree arrived early one morning to find Jonathan already in his office. This wasn't unusual. The man seemed to live at the hospital, often sleeping in the on-call room rather than returning to whatever penthouse apartment surely awaited him somewhere in Manhattan's glittering skyline. What was unusual was finding him sitting motionless at his desk, staring at a photograph she had never seen before. Good morning, Dr. Hayes, she said softly from the doorway. Unsure whether to intrude on what appeared to be a private moment, he looked up, and the expression on his face caught her off guard. The carefully constructed mask of professional competence had slipped, revealing something raw and unguarded beneath. He held up the photograph so she could see it. 2 young men grinned at the camera, arms slung around each other's shoulders, standing in front of a lake with mountains rising behind them. They looked carefree, invincible, untouched by the weight of adult responsibilities. This was taken 2 days before the accident, Jonathan said quietly. Daniel and I had stopped at some state park on our way to the conference. He wanted to go fishing, even though we were already running late. I almost said no, told him we didn't have time for frivolous detours. Bree stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. Something in his tone suggested he needed to talk, not to his assistant, or even to the girl who had helped save his brother. But to another human being, we might understand the burden of carrying old regrets. I'm glad you stopped, she offered, moving closer. That looks like a good memory. It's one of the last truly happy moments I have with him before everything changed. Jonathan continued, setting the photograph gently on his desk. The accident, the recovery, they shifted something between us. We're still close, but there's this shadow that falls across things sometimes. The awareness of how quickly everything can be taken away. He looked up at her, and in the early morning light filtering through the office windows, Bree saw past the intimidating reputation to the man who carried his own scars. Invisible, but no less real than physical wounds. Is that why you work so hard? She asked, the question emerging before she could second-guess her boldness. Why you're here before dawn and stay until midnight? Because you're trying to make sure other families don't lose what you almost lost. Jonathan's eyes widened slightly, surprised by her perception. A small, sad smile touched his lips. My therapist took 6 months to get me to admit that. You figured it out in 3 weeks. I come from a small town where everybody knows everybody's business, Bree said, returning his smile. You learn to read people when you can't escape them at the grocery store or the church potluck. Besides, I recognize the look. My daddy worked himself half to death at the general store after my baby sister died of a heart defect when I was 10. Like if he stayed busy enough, the grief couldn't catch him. The confession hung in the air between them, a shared understanding of loss and the insufficient ways people try to cope with it. Jonathan stood, moving to the window where the city was beginning to wake. Yellow taxis already streaming through streets as another frenetic day in Manhattan gathered momentum. Is that what drew you to cardiology? He asked. Your sister? Bree nodded, joining him at the window, though maintaining a respectful distance. Emma. She was only 3. The doctors said she had a congenital defect that nobody caught during prenatal screening. By the time symptoms appeared, it was too late for surgery. She died in my mama's arms at home because we couldn't afford to keep her in the hospital. And there was nothing more they could do anyway. I'm sorry, Jonathan said, and the simple words carried genuine weight. That shouldn't happen. No family should have to watch a child die because of inadequate screening or financial constraints.
Ow.
Bree agreed firmly. That's why I'm here. Well, that, and apparently fate decided I needed to cross paths with the Hayes brothers on a rainy night in Tennessee. Jonathan turned to face her fully, and something in his expression shifted. The professional distance that he usually maintained so carefully seemed to waver, replaced by something warmer, more human, infinitely more complicated. Bree. I need to tell you something, he began, then stopped himself, seeming to wrestle with how to continue. When I realized who you were that first day, felt like the universe was giving me a chance to properly thank the person who saved my brother's life. But working with you these past weeks, watching how you interact with patients, how you think through problems, I've come to realize something. He paused, and Bree's heart beat faster in the silence. You're not just a reminder of a dead I.O. You're a genuinely talented medical professional with instincts that can't be taught. You have a gift for reading patients, for seeing past symptoms to the human being underneath. That's rare, and it's valuable, and it has nothing to do with what happened 12 years ago. The compliment warmed her, but before she could respond, the office door opened abruptly. A woman strode in without knocking, her expensive suit and confident, bearing marking her as someone accustomed to entering rooms without permission when business and personal collide. Rebecca Monroe, Jonathan's business partner and the chief administrative officer of the entire Manhattan Heart Institute network, surveyed the scene before her with sharp, calculating eyes. She was in her early 40s, impeccably groomed, with auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her no-nonsense expression. We need to discuss the budget proposal for the new facility in Chicago, she said without preamble, then turned her attention to Bree. Who are you? Gabriella Thompson, Dr. Hayes' medical assistant, Bree replied, extending her hand professionally. Rebecca ignored the gesture, instead focusing her attention back on Jonathan. Your medical assistant? You've never had a permanent assistant before. You've always said they slow you down. Miss Thompson has proven herself quite capable, Jonathan replied, his tone cooling noticeably. Was there something urgent about the Chicago budget, or could it wait until our scheduled meeting this afternoon? Rebecca's eyes narrowed, and Bree felt distinctly like she was watching a power struggle play out in subtle gestures and carefully chosen words. I'd prefer to discuss it now, privately. Unless your assistant has suddenly become privy to financial planning above her pay grade. The dismissal stung, but Bree maintained her composure. I'll check on the morning admissions, she said to Jonathan, excusing herself before the tension in the room could escalate further as she closed the door behind her. She heard Rebecca's voice rise slightly. Jonathan, do you have any idea how this looks? A beautiful young assistant who somehow merits unprecedented access and responsibility? The board is already asking questions. Bree moved quickly down the hallway, not wanting to hear more. She knew office gossip was inevitable in any workplace. But having it confirmed by someone at Rebecca's level made her stomach twist with anxiety and anger. She had worked hard to get where she was, had earned every opportunity through competence and dedication, yet apparently none of that mattered when measured against assumptions about her appearance and age. She threw herself into patient care with renewed focus, checking vitals, updating charts, consulting with families about treatment plans. By mid-morning, she had pushed the uncomfortable encounter mostly from her mind, at least until Maggie pulled her aside near the nurse's station. Word to the wise, honey, the older nurse said quietly. Rebecca Monroe has been trying to get Jonathan's attention for years, and not just professionally. She doesn't take kindly to perceived competition. Bree blinked in surprise. Competition. I'm his assistant. There's nothing else happening. Maggie gave her a knowing look. Maybe not yet, but I've got eyes, sweetheart. So does everyone else on this floor? The way he looks at you when he thinks nobody's watching. That's not how a supervisor looks at an employee. You're imagining things, Bree protested, but her heart hammered against her ribs because she had felt it too. Those moments when Jonathan's gaze lingered just a fraction too long. When his hand brushed against hers during a procedure with more awareness than accident. When his voice softened in a way reserved only for her. Am I? Maggie challenged gently. Look, I'm not saying there's anything inappropriate happening. Jonathan's too professional for that, and you're too smart to risk your career. But feelings don't follow rules, and you should be aware that other people are noticing the dynamic between you two. Just be careful. The truth emerges in crisis. That afternoon brought a case that would test everything. Bree had learned and forced hidden truths into the light. An ambulance rushed in a middle-aged woman named Caroline Winters, who had collapsed during a business meeting in Midtown. Her symptoms pointed toward a severe cardiac event. But the standard tests weren't providing clear answers. Jonathan assembled his team in the examination room, running through diagnostics with methodical precision. Bree assisted, tracking data and preparing equipment, but something nagged at her. The woman's symptoms didn't quite fit the typical pattern of a heart attack or arrhythmia. There was something else, something the monitors and blood work weren't capturing. Dr. Hayes, she said hesitantly, as he prepared to order another round of tests. May I ask the patient a few questions? Jonathan paused, then nodded. Go ahead. Bree approached Caroline, who lay pale and frightened on the examination table. Mrs. Winters, I know you're scared right now, but I need you to think carefully. In the days before this happened, did you experience anything unusual? Any changes in your routine? Medications? Supplements? Anything at all? Caroline frowned, thinking, I started taking some herbal supplements last week. My friend swears by them for energy and stress relief. Why? What kind of supplements? Bree pressed. Something with ephedra, I think. The label had Chinese characters, so I'm not entirely sure.
Oh.
Bree's pulse quickened. She turned to Jonathan. We should test for ephedra toxicity. The symptoms match, The supplements could have interacted with her blood pressure medication and triggered a cardiac event. Jonathan's eyes met hers, and in that moment, she saw respect transform into something deeper. Run a full toxicology screen focused on herbal stimulants. He ordered the lab technician. Bree, prep treatment for ephedra overdose. Standard protocol. 90 minutes later, Caroline Winters was stable. The crisis averted because a young medical assistant from small town Tennessee had listened to her instincts and asked the right questions. The medical team dispersed, leaving Jonathan and Bree alone in his office to complete the incident documentation. That was exceptional diagnostic thinking, Jonathan said, signing off on the treatment summary. You potentially saved that woman's life with a simple question that none of my Ivy League-trained residents thought to ask. Bree felt pride warm her chest. I just remembered something my granddaddy used to say. Sometimes the answer isn't in what you can measure. It's in what people tell you when you actually listen. Jonathan set down his pen and looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that made the air between them feel charged with electricity. Bree, I need to say something, and I need you to just listen without responding immediately. Her mouth went dry. Okay, these past few weeks working with you, getting to know you not just as the brave girl from that night, but as the remarkable woman you've become. It's been the most alive I've felt in years. You challenge me professionally. You see past the reputation to the person underneath. And you remind me why I became a doctor in the first place. He stood, moving closer, though still maintaining appropriate distance. I know this is complicated. I know there are rules about workplace relationships and power dynamics. And I know Rebecca made accusations this morning that probably made you uncomfortable. But I also know that what I'm feeling isn't just gratitude or professional admiration. It's more than that, and I think you feel it too. Bree's breath came faster. Everything Maggie had said, every moment of tension and awareness, crystallized into undeniable truth. Jonathan, I do feel it. But you're right, this is complicated. I'm just starting my career. You're not only my supervisor, but the owner of this entire hospital network. If we acted on this, people would say, I slept my way into opportunities. They'd say you were taking advantage of your position. Neither of us can afford that kind of scrutiny. I know, he said softly. Believe me, I know. I've spent 3 weeks trying to talk myself out of these feelings, telling myself it's just residual emotion from that night in Tennessee, or appreciation for your professional competence, or loneliness after years of keeping everyone at arm's length. But none of those explanations hold up when I'm honest with myself. He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. When she didn't move, he gently touched her cheek, the gesture achingly tender. So here's what I propose. You continue your training here, under my supervision, and we maintain absolute professionalism in the workplace. No special treatment, no appearance of impropriety. But outside these walls, on your time off, we get to know each other as people, not as doctor and assistant. Dinners, conversations, walks in the park, whatever feels right. And if after 6 months we still feel this connection, we'll figure out how to navigate the professional complications together. It was reasonable, thoughtful, exactly the kind of careful planning she would expect from someone like Jonathan Hayes. It was also terrifying because it made the possibility real. Transformed unnamed feelings into something they would both have to acknowledge and protect. 6 months, she repeated softly. An absolute professionalism here. 6 months, he confirmed. Starting now, he stepped back. The professional distance slamming back into place so completely that Bree almost doubted the intimacy of moments before. Almost, but the warmth of where his hand had touched her cheek lingered. A ghost of possibility that would stay with her through the long months ahead. The dance of professional. Distance winter descended on Manhattan with unusual fury, coating the city in snow and ice that transformed familiar streets into treacherous landscapes. Inside Manhattan Heart Institute, season brought its own challenges as respiratory issues combined with cardiac complications to fill every available bed. Bree and Jonathan moved through the chaos with practiced coordination, their agreement holding firm through countless shared shifts and medical emergencies. To outside observers, They were the picture of professional collaboration. Dr. Hayes remained demanding and exacting, while his assistant performed her duties with exceptional competence, but no hint of special favor. What no one saw were the late dinners in quiet restaurants far from the hospital, the Sunday afternoon walks through snow-dusted Central Park where they talked about everything except medicine, the gradual revelation of two people discovering they fit together in ways neither had anticipated. Jonathan told her about growing up in old-money Boston society, the pressure to live up to a family name built on 4 generations of physicians, the way his relationship with Daniel had been both competition and companionship. Bree shared stories of Tennessee poverty that never felt like poverty because of community and love. The shame she had initially felt arriving at prestigious hospitals with her rural accent and bargain store clothes. The determination that drove her forward when easier paths beckoned. "You know what I love about you?" Jonathan said one evening as they sat in his car outside her modest Brooklyn apartment, the heater fighting against February cold. "You never needed my name or my money or my connections to know your worth. You carried your value inside yourself the whole time." Bree smiled, reaching across to take his hand. "And you know what I love about you? Under all that intimidating brilliance, you're just a man who wants to save people because you couldn't save your sister from her pain. Just like I couldn't save Emma. We're more alike than anyone would guess. My sister." Jonathan's expression shifted to confusion. "I don't have a sister. Just Daniel." Bree frowned. "But you said someone close to you died, that you worked so hard to save families from that loss." Understanding dawned in Jonathan's eyes, followed by something heavy and sad. "Not a sister. Daniel's daughter, my niece, Abigail. She died 4 years ago from complications during a routine surgery. She was 7 years old." The revelation hit Bree like a physical blow. "Jonathan, I'm so sorry. I assumed when you talked about driving yourself to save others, I thought it was about the accident." He shook his head slowly. "The accident taught me life was fragile. Losing Abigail taught me that even all my skill and knowledge and resources couldn't protect the people I loved from loss. She died in my hospital, Bree, under my watch. The surgery was supposed to be straightforward, routine. But there were complications, a rare reaction to anesthesia that we caught too late."
Nice.
Tears glistened in his eyes, and Bree felt her heart breaking for the pain he carried. "It wasn't your fault," she said fiercely. "Medicine has limits. You taught me that. We can't save everyone, no matter how hard we try." "I know that intellectually," Jonathan replied. "But the heart doesn't always listen to the head. Daniel tried to forgive me, said there was nothing to forgive, but I see it in his eyes sometimes. The question of whether things might have been different if I had been more careful, more vigilant, more something. Why he demanded perfection from himself and everyone around him. Why he had kept emotional distance from colleagues and patients alike. He was trying to build walls strong enough to protect against the kind of pain that had nearly destroyed him. "You're not alone in that pain anymore," she told him gently. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." When the past and present collide, March brought a late winter storm that paralyzed the city just as Manhattan heart. The Institute faced one of its busiest nights in recent memory. Accidents on icy roads filled the emergency department, while the cardiac unit dealt with stress-induced events from people shoveling snow and enduring cold that taxed. Compromised hearts. Bree was pulling a double shift, covering for a colleague out sick with influenza. When Rebecca Monroe appeared in the cardiac unit at nearly midnight, the administrative officer rarely ventured into clinical areas, preferring her executive suite and boardroom negotiations to the messy reality of patient care. "I need to speak with you." "Miss Thompson," Rebecca said without preamble. Privately. Maggie shot Bree a warning look, but there was no graceful way to refuse. They moved to an empty consultation room, where families usually received difficult news about loved ones. The symbolism wasn't lost on Bree. "I'm going to be direct because I respect your intelligence too much to play games," Rebecca began, her tone businesslike but not unkind. "I know you're seeing Jonathan outside of work. Don't bother denying it. I've seen you together, and while you've been admirably discreet, you can't hide the way you look at each other." Bree's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. "With respect, my personal life is my own business." Normally I would agree, Rebecca replied. But Jonathan is in a normal situation. He's the face of this institution, the primary investor, and the reason we have funding for research and expansion. His reputation affects hundreds of employees and thousands of patients. Are you threatening me? Bree asked quietly. I'm warning you, Rebecca corrected. The board of directors is becoming concerned about Jonathan's judgment. He's refused lucrative research opportunities. He's turned down speaking engagements and generally withdrawn from the networking that keeps this place financially viable. They've noticed the timing coincides with your arrival, so you're blaming me for his professional choices? Rebecca sighed, and for the first time her polished facade cracked slightly. I'm trying to protect him, and by extension this hospital. Jonathan is brilliant, but he's also carrying grief and guilt that makes him vulnerable. I've watched him build walls for 4 years, keeping everyone at a safe distance. Then you appear, and suddenly those walls are crumbling. It terrifies me. The honesty surprised Bree. Why do you care so much? Because I love him, Rebecca said simply. Not romantically, though I won't pretend I didn't hope for that at one time. But as a friend, as someone who's known him since medical school, as someone who held him together when Abigail died and Daniel couldn't even look at him, Bree felt the weight of that history. Understanding now the depth of connection between Jonathan and Rebecca that went far beyond business partnership. I'm not here to hurt him, Bree said firmly. I care about Jonathan deeply. I also respect what he's built here and wouldn't do anything to jeopardize it. That's exactly what worries me, Rebecca replied. Because the heart doesn't care about good intentions. It just feels, and then we have to deal with the consequences. Before Bree could respond, both their pagers sounded simultaneously. A code blew in room 614. The same elderly patient from Bree's first day who had made a remarkable recovery, only to be readmitted weeks. Later, with worsening symptoms, they rushed together to the room where a full team was already working. Jonathan stood at the bedside, his face grim as he called out orders with the calm authority Bree had come to recognize as his way of holding terror at bay. Multiple organ failure, he said as they entered. The heart transplant he needs isn't going to arrive in time. We're losing him. For the next 2 hours, they fought. Every medical intervention, every technique, every desperate measure to keep life anchored in a failing body. But some battles cannot be won through skill or determination or sheer force of will. At 2:47 a.m., patient died, surrounded by people who had exhausted every option trying to save him. The team dispersed slowly, the weight of defeat heavy on shoulders already carrying too many losses. The moment truth can no longer. Bree found Jonathan an hour later in the hospital chapel, a small non-denominational space maintained more for tradition than active use. He sat alone in the front pew, still in his blood-stained surgical scrubs, staring at nothing. She sat beside him without speaking, and for long minutes they existed together in silence. Finally, Jonathan's voice emerged, raw and broken. I couldn't save him. For years of research, millions of dollars in equipment, all my training and experience, I couldn't save one 73-year-old man who wanted nothing more than to attend his granddaughter's wedding next month. No, Bree agreed softly. But you gave him 4 extra months with his family when he shouldn't have survived his first heart attack. You gave him time to tell his grandchildren he loved them, to make peace with his son, to write letters for his great-grandchildren who aren't born yet. That matters, Jonathan. That all matters. He turned to look at her, and the raw pain in his eyes nearly broke her. Does it? Or am I just delaying the inevitable while pretending I'm making a difference? You saved your brother, Bree reminded him. You save people every single day. You've built a hospital that provides care regardless of ability to pay. You've trained a generation of cardiologists. You've advanced research that will save thousands of people you'll never meet. You're not God, Jonathan. You're a man doing the best he can with the limits we all face. I'm tired, he confessed. I'm tired of losing patience. Tired of carrying guilt for things I couldn't control. Tired of being afraid to feel anything because it might hurt too much when it's taken away. Bree took his hand, holding tight. Then stop, she said simply. Stop punishing yourself for being human. Stop running from connection because you're afraid of loss. Stop existing in this half-life where you save everyone else but won't allow yourself to be saved. Bree, he whispered her name like a prayer. I love you, she said, the words emerging with absolute certainty. I know it's complicated and messy and probably breaks every rule about professionalism. I know we said 6 months before we figured things out, but life doesn't wait for convenient timing. People die, storms hit, hearts break, and heal in their own rhythm. I love you, and I'm not going to pretend I don't because it makes things simpler. Jonathan pulled her into his arms, holding her with the desperation of someone who had been drowning and finally found solid ground. I love you too, he said against her hair. I've loved you since that night in Tennessee when a brave girl refused to let my brother die. I loved you when you walked into my office so nervous but determined to succeed. I love you now, covered in hospital smell and exhausted from a double shift, but still trying to save me from myself. They sat together in the chapel. Two healers who had spent their lives saving others, finally admitting they needed saving too. Outside, dawn began breaking over Manhattan. Another day arriving whether anyone was ready or not. 6 months later, full circle the grand opening of the Daniel Hayes Memorial Cardiac Center in Pineville. Tennessee drew physicians from across the country. The small mountain town had never seen anything like it. A state-of-the-art facility offering free cardiac screening and treatment to rural communities that had gone generations without adequate care. Jonathan stood at the podium during the dedication ceremony, looking out at a crowd that included his brother Daniel and his family, Rebecca Monroe, who had become one of his and Bree's strongest advocates once she understood their relationship was genuine, Maggie Foster, who cried openly at seeing her protege succeed, and Bree's parents, who still couldn't quite believe their daughter was dating a billionaire doctor, but loved him anyway because he made their child happy. 12 years ago, I had an accident on a road not far from here, Jonathan began. A young girl saved my brother's life that night, but what I didn't realize until much later was that she saved mine too. She reminded me that medicine isn't about sterile hospitals and advanced technology. It's about human beings helping other human beings survive and thrive. He looked directly at Bree, who stood in the front row wearing a simple dress, and the engagement ring he had given her just weeks earlier during a quiet moment in Central Park. This facility exists because one person showed extraordinary courage and compassion when it mattered most. It exists to honor all the Emmas and Abigails who deserved better access to care. It exists because sometimes the universe gives us a second chance to thank the people who changed our lives, and we should be smart enough to take it. The crowd erupted in applause as Jonathan stepped down from the podium and walked directly to Bree, pulling her into his arms in full view of everyone. Let them talk. Let them gossip. Love was worth being seen. Later, as the celebration continued inside the new facility, Bree and Jonathan slipped away to walk the familiar mountain road where their story had truly begun. The evening sun cast long shadows through the trees, and somewhere a creek bubbled over rocks just like it had that stormy night so many years ago.
Oh.
Do you think your sister would have liked this? Jonathan asked, referencing the cardiac screening program that would bear Emma's name. She would have loved knowing that other kids won't have to die because their families can't afford treatment, Bree replied. Just like Abigail would have loved knowing her uncle built something beautiful from his grief. They walked in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love despite complications, who had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need someone else. You know what's funny? Bree said as they reached the spot where the accident had happened, now marked with a small plaque. Everyone focuses on how I saved Daniel that night, but neither of us could have known that 12 years later. You'd save me right back by giving me a chance when I was just a scared girl from the mountains, trying to make something of herself. We saved each other, Jonathan corrected, pulling her close. That's what love does. It recognizes the broken parts and says they're worth healing. It sees the scared parts and says, you don't have to be brave alone. It takes two people with separate stories and weaves them into something neither could have written on their own. As the sun set over the Tennessee mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they stood together at the place where everything had begun and everything had changed. The road that had once held tragedy now held promise. The storm that had brought destruction had ultimately brought connection. And somewhere in the new, cardiac center behind them, the first patients were receiving care that would save lives, continue stories, and prove that sometimes the best medicine isn't found in pills or procedures. Sometimes it's found in human beings who refuse to give up on each other, who show up in the rain, who hold on when letting go would be easier. Sometimes the best medicine is simply love, persistent and brave and absolutely worth the risk.